this is a very fundamental part of people's lives, and we think there's still a lot of, I guess, ground to explore in terms of like, what are those verbs that are fundamental to banking? Like, how can we help people manage their money better? What are sort of innovative new solutions that may solve those problems and some others?
Hey, welcome to Homescreen. I'm Jim Safford and I'm a product lead here at 11FS. Homescreen is a show brought to you by the Pulse team. It's a show about product where we talk to you about the products that are being built out there, how they're being designed, and a few nuggets about sort of the ways that they're differentiating themselves from their key competitors in the market. To find out a little bit more about 11FS Pulse, the product that goes underneath this show, then please go over to pulse.11fs.com or at 11FS Pulse on Twitter. And today I'm joined by Anson Parker, who is joining us from Up, the fintech we've really loved seeing develop over the past year and a half in Australia. Could you do us a favour and tell us a little bit about you, Anson, and how you ended up with Up, if you will, and also a little bit more about what Up is.
Yeah, I've been working in software in the online sort of space for a long time, really, probably since the early 2000s. I kind of started out up in Sydney, which is obviously everyone knows Sydney, more in the design space, and sort of got a taste of that in front end, and sort of dabbled with back end. And up there I worked on with media and some e-commerce stuff, and eventually kind of got into the startup scene and went over to San Francisco for a couple of years.
Oh, cool.
With a startup there, which was a lot of fun. I learned a ton. And ultimately we burned out of money. This was like 2008.
Right. And then.
Yeah, it was sort of like the GFC. And so I came back to Australia after that and moved down to Melbourne, and sort of fell in with the group that became Ferocia, which is sort of the company, I guess, behind Up. Mm-hmm. And our first kind of real job was we basically won a pitch to redevelop like mobile and internet banking for one of the big banks in Australia, called Bendigo and Adelaide Bank. They're essentially the fifth biggest bank here. They're sort of somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million customers. Mm-hmm. So reasonable size, but they had sort of quite outdated sort of experiences, and they were looking for something different to stand out in the space. And so I think in a way we won this kind of project to redevelop banking for Bendigo, but they kind of gave us the mobile piece of it. I think in large part because that was kind of seen as a bit of the Wild West. And
right.
If you stuff that up a bit with all your weird open source technologies like Ruby on Rails and Postgres databases, like it's only mobile. People are used to being that pretty flaky at the time. So it was kind of a godsend. We really kind of got established in that space and got to learn about, I guess, the challenges of banking, like all of the legacy technology. And through that process, I guess we got a taste of, or an understanding of what we could do if we were just kind of given free rein to really imagine and execute on the experience that we wanted to exist. So that really led to Up. So I guess we, Ferocia, that company, sort of pivoted from being a sort of services company into a product company with the launch of Up. But we're able to use that relationship we'd established with Bendigo and Adelaide Bank to essentially partner. So Up is very different to most neobanks in that we are not a bank. As such, we don't have our own license. There are definitely some banks, neos, sort of of this model, but we're able to use the license of a bank, which has all sorts of advantages for us. We don't really need to hire any bankers. We don't need all the overheads of that takes, the compliance and regulation and risk and the cost of having that stuff operate. So it's sort of a long story, not that short, but that's kind of, I guess, how Up came to be.
And there was some, I remember reading somewhere, there was some suggestion that you guys could work with one of the big four banks, and there was like maybe some flirting with the idea of doing that. However, there was something of a cultural fit or an understanding with your partner banks then?
Yeah, we had, I guess in that phase of being sort of a services company, we'd done some work with a couple of the big four banks here, and got a sense of what that meant and what they were like to engage with. I mean, we're a company of really 20 or 30 people, and trying to engage with an organization of thousands is quite a challenge. And then just understanding like the tech stacks of those big corporate entities, the way they make decisions. We kind of realized that what we had with Bendigo was kind of all the ingredients that we needed. They weren't gonna, that we could do, like with what they had, we could actually sort of execute on the vision and not really be held back. And we had built that trust, which I think was the key thing. Like it's probably tough for someone else to come into the space using that same model without having had that, like, sort of, I think it was like a 5-year relationship we'd had at that point before we launched up.
Sure. And this is opportune because this now, as you mentioned there, Ferocia pivoting from a services business into a product one seems to have nicely coincided with the kind of the announcement and the starting to roll out of consumer data right in Australia. Was there any kind of correlation there between what you were doing and building with this consumer data right legislation?
No, I think I guess at the time we really started building up, which was probably, maybe a year or so before it actually launched. There wasn't too much, I think there'd been a couple sort of some murmurings around open banking. We'd maybe seen it happen in the UK, but it wasn't like massively on the radar. It's the same with kind of the banking licensing model that came into play. In Australia, it's called a restricted ADI, which was sort of a path for fintechs, I guess, to pursue becoming a bank over time. Both of those things kind of actually happened around the time that we were getting started, but they weren't necessarily causal for us, although I think they sort of meant that, like, at the point in time right now, we have, a bunch of competitors kind of launching or soon to launch. The consumer data right and sort of the banking implementation of that, which is sort of the first thing to launch, is fairly close. But I guess for Australia, I mean, we have a fairly strong fintech community that has, I guess, had to survive without it. And so without the sort of consumer data right and that legislated, mandated kind of open APIs. So I think that, for us, it's kind of like hard to totally understand what will change, in the short term, given that all these companies that kind of want that data, whether it's like, sort of these personal financial management tools that are aggregating accounts together, or payment technologies that are kind of using the bank's payment rails instead of like MasterCard and Visa, or the sort of managed, or like lending that connects to your bank. All of those things kind of exist here today.
Yeah.
Probably not in the way that they should exist strictly, because people are providing login details to these apps that are basically scraping. But we kind of have that. We have, the future is here now. It's just probably some of the implementation is probably not what it should be.
Right.
Which is not to say that it won't take off at a faster sort of velocity. I think when we have this, and as it expands to other verticals too, I think it'll open up all sorts of opportunities.
If it wasn't sort of born out of that spirit of what that legislation would provide, what was the thing you were trying to do with the product before it, when you were kind of conceiving it, and has that changed in any way? Are you trying to build something different to what you thought you were building before?
I mean, I think like fundamentally, we just saw that there was a big opportunity just to do better, to help people more, to give people more understanding of what's going on with their money. That the sort of 4 pillars that Australia has in place, that sort of I guess, like, globally, the banks here are considered at a pretty high standard, and the experience of online banking is pretty good. But from a software mindset, you're like, there's so much more we could do to help people. That was really kind of the motivation for us, was just that, like Up didn't start because we looked at banks and we thought we want to be one of those big banks and have those huge profits. It really started from from us wearing that customer hat and saying, we want to build the sort of experience that we want to exist. And so that's kind of been our guiding principle, really is trying to get, I guess, put people back in control of their money. And building savings is kind of the flip side, as we see to that. At least that first stage is like, if you can establish good savings behaviors young, like that will set you up, for life. And it's not just about, buying defining your goals, buying a MacBook or an iPhone or the latest shiny gadget. It's really about giving people that freedom to like leave a crappy job or survive an unexpected event, or whatever it is, take a new opportunity they might not be able to take otherwise. And so I don't think that's really changed at all. We've absolutely learned a ton, in this sort of year and a half that we've been around, but that kind of core mission of why we're here and what we're doing, we probably could have done it like 10 years ago in a way. That need was always there in our eyes.
How do you typically go about finding the fit that you need for what the user's telling you and how you build around that?
Yeah, it's like a really interesting, I think, question for Up, because Up's probably quite different, I guess, to a lot of, I guess, where that kind of discipline and those practices are going, which is kind of, they're sort of trending to more formalized, more process driven, a lot of like sprint-based validation stuff. I think at least at this stage of where we're at, which, we're still a fairly young company in terms of the Up, I guess we kind of, at some level, resist this idea of just becoming a bank as quickly as possible. We kind of want to take our time and really explore kind of what's possible and kind of have an innovation mindset. And I think that means we are less about kind of an amazing execution of what people think a bank is today, right? Which is, I think, a perfectly good strategy, which is just like, get rid of all the friction, make a bank not suck, like have everything digital, like digital processes, like frictionless, like great experience. But, like it's a transaction account, a line of credits, it's all these things we know today. I think we're kind of taking a slightly different approach, which is like, this is a very fundamental part of people's lives. And we think there's still a lot of, I guess, ground to explore in terms of like, what are those verbs that are fundamental to banking? Like, how can we help people manage their money better? Like, and so I think that we go into it less kind of like, all right, 80% of our customers want this, let's build that. And more about like, what are the problems people have? What are sort of innovative new solutions that may solve those problems and some others? So it's very, Up does have this very sort of deep relationship with our customers in that all of our sort of communication is really through the app. So people, the section of that part of the app is called Talk to Us. So people use that for your traditional support, but they also submit ideas and provide feedback, and it's very much a dialogue. We can sort of send surveys out through it, engage opinion. So we're sort of very connected, I guess, to what people are after, but we sort of, I guess, use our sort of creative license to interpret that and try and deliver something that might not be exactly what they've asked for, but delivers in the spirit of that.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's possible because we're very much an engineering company and most of our staff are engineers. And so what we're able to do is go from sort of conception to that first iteration very, very quickly. And so we're able to leverage that to kind of skip, I guess, the traditional concept of what user testing is, and get something into the app very, very quickly that we can validate and take from there. So, I think that our general philosophy is that there's like the coolest features haven't been kind of thought of yet, and let's go off and find them.
Yeah, for sure. And those have to. I thought that was really, really interesting there what you're saying. And we've heard this a few times where it's don't just build what your users tell you to build. It's sort of interpret what they're saying and then build within the spirit of what they're saying. And then you at the end of the day are the experts on the tech side of things, and can interpret what they're saying. I was very lucky a few weeks ago to speak to Travis Tyler, who is in charge of product at 86400 in Sydney, who described, I guess, is playing in a pretty similar space to Up, in the sense of it's an emerging sort of neobanky style product. They might be taking a little bit of a different approach in terms of the actual financial infrastructure underneath it. But definitely a new emerging brand from Australia, which was really interesting. He sort of viewed their cohort to be slightly, a little bit more of that sort of 25 to maybe 40 or so, a sort of an age generation or an age bracket around there. Do you have sort of similar understandings of the kind of psychographics or the information about your users in that regard? Do you put them in an age bracket?
We certainly pay attention to it. I mean, I think we didn't set out I guess so. The overall up demographics. If we just look at age, our median age is 24. So half our customers are between 16 and 24, and 80% of them are under 35.
Yeah.
So it's very young. It's probably sounds like it's a younger skewing demographic than that. And it's not that we've set out to create a bank for young people necessarily. We've just kind of focused on problems, and I guess the product offering is essentially transactional and savings. And so there are no home loans, there's no credit card, no term deposits. There's no, those things don't really exist. So at least today. So it's kind of self-selecting. I think the people that are most interested in terms of going all in on are the people that are well served by just having those, living off the cash that they have on hand, building savings. And that is definitely skewed it younger. And there's no doubt elements of a feedback loop there that mean we start to think about, more specifically those problems. And so I think that's more rather.
I guess your design language reflects that a little bit in a way as well. Like it's very bold, and it seems like it skews towards that demographic. Was that something which is sort of a decision which you took right off the bat, or was it, you started to see the customers of that age were coming and therefore decided to skew the design in that direction?
I think, thinking back to kind of, I guess, that the birth of the brand in that way, it was I guess we just thought of those things that we really valued and thought would be great to have in a brand, a sense of humor, maybe not all the obvious things, but, especially in banking, where, there's definitely a cohort of people that think banks have to always be serious. It's like solemnly delivered advice by sort of an ashen-faced banker. That's what banking needs to be, because it's money and you have to take it seriously.
Yeah.
And we were like, look, there are absolutely things that need to be where there's no place for kind of emojis or humor or, making light of situations, but it doesn't have to be this kind of dry, serious space. It can be, a bit more lively, a bit more interesting. Fundamentally, I guess we're about trying to get people engaged with money. And I don't think you can do that if you treat it as something that's kind of dry and sterile and off and and devoid of humor. So we just kind of wanted to be ourselves. We didn't want to try and invent a brand that was like a hipster cool brand appealing to kids or something. We just really wanted to reflect our own kind of, I guess, approaches and personalities, and that was to be kind of open and transparent, authentic, have a sense of humor, and play with brand. Brand is a really fun thing to play with. There's a lot of opportunity in it to try new things and not just kind of arrive at the kind of final kind of, outcome of what you want to be in 10 years. I think a really fun thing with a brand is to kind of grow with your customers and define who you are over time, and not just kind of, the temptation is always to be like, what do we want to be in 10 or 20 years? What is that brand?
Yeah.
Whereas we've kind of been more organic, I guess, and just iterative, both through the software, but also, the hardware, if you like, the cards and the welcome packs and all that stuff. We just kind of see it through that same lens.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things about your company as well. And it's one we saw, I think, which resonated quite strongly in the UK was when Monzo came around with their hot coral sort of cards. They kind of did it a few years ago, and they had these bright cards, and the notion being that they were just, something that if you dropped it in a nightclub or something, you'd be able to find it quite easily. And it made a big impact in the way that people actually interacted with the product. It became a sort of cultural touchstone in the UK for a while, that notion of having a Monzo card or something like that. And I guess that's something that you think about a little bit as well, in terms of that first interaction that a user has, not necessarily with the app, but with a product that you've created yourselves, like for example, this card and this delivery pack that hopefully you'll be able to show us in a minute. The idea there that you don't just have a relationship with a user on a smartphone, on an app, it's something that then becomes a physical thing, a manifestation which comes through the door, when you've got the envelope arriving. That's another invitation or an opportunity for you guys to interact with your users. Is that how you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably we kind of knew that, I guess, the sending out people a card was really the only chance we were likely to have to send them something in the mail, to have that physical interaction.
Yeah.
So, I just think it's sort of our approach to everything is, well, let's have a look at what is done today and think about why. And so much of stuff in banking and is just kind of, that's the way it's always been done. The card's always horizontal, the numbers are always sort of stamped on it. It always comes on a folded up, or generally always comes on a folded up piece of paper with a sticker over it. Your number's on the front, you can't share it. So it was just kind of rethinking those things, and I guess having the backing just to kind of take some chances on it, and say, what if we can make that moment of receiving a welcome pack a delightful thing? Because especially when you're starting out in the space, I mean, it is different from a lot of other kind of of the sort of apps and online kind of opportunities. There is this sort of higher stakes element to banking, and there is this element of trust that you have to win, and it's sort of an open question as to how much you can bend that idea of a bank, like how much do we need to be seen as a sort of like bricks and mortar, old school reliable bank versus sort of a fast moving app. And so I think that, you're always, that's always the doubt you have in your mind is like, if we push this too far, will we, is that going to freak people out? Or even, will people think this is real? The way most people still really sign up for banks in Australia is generally by making the decision. They don't really shop around. Maybe they've shopped around because they're looking for a mortgage, but they kind of just walk into a branch. It's like, right, I'm moving here. Here's all my details. Let's do this. It's kind of a big sort of decision, and it doesn't happen very often. So it's this, big build up. And we didn't want to kind of have to solve that problem. Like, that's a pretty tough problem to solve. It usually takes a lot of money and convincing. So we wanted to be more on the app side of things. But, that means that people, maybe they're not exactly sure if you're real yet. And receiving that kind of tangible card in the mail is kind of an important milestone. We certainly see that there's absolutely a cohort of people that will sign up but won't really engage until they get that card and they sort of know it's real in that way. That's not the majority, but there's absolutely a group that does that.
Yeah. And what sort of things are you looking to include on that welcome pack? I believe you've got one with you right now, if you don't mind sharing it. But so what's important information to convey at that point when they first get hold of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. This is sort of our latest iteration, and we really kind of have iterated a lot on this. This is sort of our new form. It's sort of more compact. Yeah. It's sort of 3 pieces of beer coaster actually that are kind of sandwiched together and have cutouts and die cuts, and that's how the card slides in. Oh, nice. So look, really, what we kind of looked at a lot of the that card arrival experience, and it's just so much boilerplate. There's so much stuff that really is not adding any value. And so what we sort of wanted to do is just impart that energy and that excitement and provide that kind of buzz. Like, I really want to try this out. I want to take this card out. Yeah. Obviously, it's kind of that vertical orientation, which is pretty common these days, but I think this was really one of the early kind of adopters of that format. Mm-hmm. And so we just want to get people excited about Up. And so we used to kind of have on the back, there was kind of like, here's why you should use this card. Like, rather than like sort of, scheme benefits or things like that, it was like, why should you care about that?
Yeah.
But we recently changed that because we're like, well, what do we do with these? We send out all these beautiful welcome packs that are lovingly put together on these old school, like Heidelberg German presses by this company in Melbourne. They're really beautiful. And it's kind of a shame that people were telling us, like, I'll save it in the drawer because I can't throw it away. So we thought, well, how do we kind of make it something you could keep? We did like the idea because they're technically beer coasters, of sort of making them like beer coasters you could have at home. But in the end, we decided we'd try this out. And so we put I guess it's like almost the things you used to get in a cereal box, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
The little kind of activity you can do on the back, which is basically something we'd seen online. A bunch of times we tried to find the sort of source for it, but we couldn't, which is this idea of like, hey, here's how you save $1,000. You basically put a small amount of money away each week. You can have a few weeks off. And by the end of the year, you'll have $1,000 in an account. So we thought that was like a really cool thing that people could sort of put up on their fridge and sort of cross off as they went through each week, and kind of be kind of that delightful moment.
That's really fascinating. And do you feel like that first impression, and also like that long impression of like holding on to it, as you said, like putting it on the fridge, does that really matters for you guys in terms of how your users will interpret you, and have you seen any kind of like impact in the way that they're using the product? Is there like can you tell when there's been a new iteration of like those releases, package releases, because of a spike in usage or anything like that? Does it ever have any of that impact?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely see people sharing. I guess that was part of one of the original aims, was like, how do we make this something people will share? How do we make it good enough content? Because it's like, we're all content producers today, right? Everyone has their like Instagram or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like, we need to make this good enough that they're happy to share it. And so,
Sure.
So we really see that a lot. Huge amounts of sharing of that welcome pack, and when we introduced the save $1,000 in a year thing, we had a massive response to that. People, part of the problem with iterating in that space is people see there's a new card and they want it, so it's like all of a sudden people have damaged cards coming in left, right, and center. So we absolutely see that, and I think to your earlier point around Monzo, I mean, I don't think we appreciated early days to what extent that the card is really kind of like this mobile billboard for your business. Like the fact that it is so distinctive, it's not just for the benefit of the customer using it, it's really for everyone else that sees that. Australia's I think leads the world in sort of that tap and go payment adoption. So it's a card like that is sort of out there and really advertising your brand too.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. And it's probably a little bit it's probably something that's been eaten into a little bit by, if people are starting to adopt maybe Google Pay and Apple Pay a little bit more. You have noted there on the card that it is available. But whilst this is still a thing, then it's a nice, neat little way of doing a little bit more advertising. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. That's really cool. And just a final note on that, the design is really striking and it's sort of pervasive throughout the entirety of the product. What's who's the designer in the team? What does that sort of design team look like for you guys and things?
Yeah, it's a sort of interesting kind of journey, because we really the design competence initially was very much sort of a product and UI design competence, and like the brand and the original logo sort of came from it in-house, but we sort of worked a bit with a small brand studio in Melbourne.
Okay.
That sort of through that journey, we really learned, I guess, we were kind of surprised by how impactful the brand was and how much people really loved that visual.
Yeah.
And I think it was just so fresh and banking to have that kind of sort of looser, more playful brand. And so like the guy who ran that agency now is actually a full-time employee of us, because he just loved, he did a lot of like branding of, restaurants and cafes and all sorts of different spaces, but he just loved Up so much that he wanted to kind of be fully all in. And so he actually now works as a full-time employee for us.
Nice.
And so it's been, I guess, particularly for a software kind of mindset company, a real eye-opening thing to see the power of a good brand, a brand that really connects. We always used to be about, it's all about execution and that product experience. But, the brand, we just have appreciated how important that is.
Yeah, sure. Cool. So we're going to start looking at a few of the videos of how the app actually looks. So this is, as I said, like a really quick overview of what the app sort of looks like, and then a little bit more detail as to how the sort of transactions feed sort of looks and works there. So moving into the payments area, we can see where a payment's been made. And then there we've got some bonus active rate there, a little bit of a transaction style feed there with dates next to it. And then looks like a few details there of rate changes and things like that. There's a whole lot going on this transaction feed in terms of like the different layers and levels of information that's conveyed. What was important for you guys in terms of like categorization like this? What was important information to include there?
I guess primarily we wanted to create something that was just beautiful to look at and engaging, and was more of the mold of kind of the social media news feed. So
sure.
Like there's so much to sort of unpack, obviously, like you're saying, and what you're seeing here. But identifying merchants was sort of a big core piece of technology that we developed, so that we could get away from that sort of all caps statement like experience. So showing a logo, showing a nicely formatted name. Time of day is something that in Australia is still very uncommon in banking. It's kind of like things just happen on a calendar day and in a weird order that you don't understand. So, even things like that, people take that for granted. They probably do already, but it's, surprisingly tricky to get that sort of stuff in. It's just not really how a lot of this legacy technology works. So putting in time of day, sort of location, was sort of the fundamentals, I guess. But we're also very focused on this being kind of a mass market approach. We didn't want to, I guess, a lot of what we've seen and, a lot of what Up's doing is, I guess, in helping you understand where your money's going is, exposing things like categories of spending. And we didn't want that to be just something for kind of the sort of finance nerds to get off on. We wanted it to be really more generally useful to people. So we wanted to do a good job out of the box at finding sort of a categorization system that was kind of relatable and interesting, and not just kind of giving people that initial moment of, a pretty pie chart that they think is cool, and then a week later they're sort of over it. So a lot of that sort of stuff went into it. A lot of that thinking went into what we're doing, and it sort of evolved over time. Like we do a lot to, I guess, to distill down and simplify as much as sort of as dense as that is. We, like a lot of sort of neos, have played in this roundup space of taking a transaction and rounding up the change, I guess, to make an even dollar transaction. And we always like that, for the savings benefit, that kind of passive savings approach, but also it just honestly cleans up the feed. It's like all of a sudden all of your dollar amounts are just even dollars. You don't have cents rendered and things like that to simplify and just make it more engaging. Like from our point of view, if we can keep people connected to that, and keep them from disengaging, then we've kind of that sort of half the battle won.
Is that your sort of covered area there? Like I noticed a bit where we were talking about there's some different areas like deposit for a house, like there's like holiday, that kind of thing. So it's like the simple sort of furrowing of money into different sort of areas there. What did you call that within the app?
So that was sort of, I think, on the screen right at the start, which was sort of the pay splitting feature. So again, like it's sort of something, where, I guess most banks, a customer could say, look, I get paid on the first of the month. So on the first of the month, I'm going to set up all of these sort of recurring transfers to move money into my various, pots or accounts or whatever you're calling them. Whereas we just said, look, we can detect when you get paid, and we will just give you a set of sliders to determine how that's sort of distributed between the things you are saving for. So if you want to put 10% away into your house deposit, you don't need to know when you get paid or set up a transfer. You just need to say, I want to split that up and move a slider. And then when that happens, instead of sort of seeing this series of like transaction, we wanted to kind of roll it up into a nice kind of single view that again, is just kind of more approachable.
Nice. We're going to roll through to the next one now. We're talking a little bit there about splitting payments and a covering of a purchase. So in this one, again, we've got this running through these really nice different feeds. And then this sort of chat style feed from your account, a Bendigo account here, which I guess is the bank account, which is backing up your Europe account. And then we can enable the split function, which we can show splitting into different pots here. I mean, nice to see that progress bar sort of sliding back to show how much we've got left. I remember there being a lot of noise being made about Elizabeth Warren's policy around this of sort of like 50, 30, 20, 50% of your income going towards, was it like a rent or mortgage or whatever, 30 to whatever, and then saving 20. And we've seen sort of some players adopting that as a really good method. And they're trending to use this sort of, this like series of sliders, or reactive sliders, as a way of conveying that quite nicely. And just whilst we're on here, we've got these quite interesting words here: forwarded and covered. Can you tell us a little bit about what they are?
Yeah, they're kind of, I guess, words that we made up. I don't know if they've existed in banking before, but maybe I'll try and use this sort of analogy to explain what they are, and hopefully it makes sense. But I guess intuitively, when you think about your bank balance and your a transaction account, you kind of think of it like a fuel tank or a water cooler, of sort of having a certain level, which is your balance, and the transactions sort of explain why that balance is the way that it is. There's kind of another way of thinking about it, which is, imagine that your account is actually a set of scales, right, with two buckets on either side. And on one bucket you have what banks call credits, right, which is essentially money that's coming into your account. And so think of that bucket as containing all of these credits, which are like metal balls, and the weight of the ball is kind of the amount of money that credit contains. Then on the other side, you have a bucket of what a bank would call debits, which are things that you've paid for, and they're the same. And so those have each of those things you paid for has its own weight as well. And so you have this set of scales, right, with credits on one side and debits on the other side. And if you take all those credits, all of that money in, and you add that up, and then you subtract all the debits, the money out, then that's essentially how a bank knows how much money you have. It has to actually, your balance is essentially a calculation. And banks will, store it and cache it, and you have a running balance. They don't have to go back to the start of time to work out how much money you have, but that's essentially how bank accounts work. And so we kind of had this idea, like, if you think about it in that way, what if you could take one of those credit balls, right, which might be, say, $10 that a friend's paid you, and take that from your main up account and put it in another set of scales, which, imagine each of your savers is that same set of scales. So you could take that $10 payment out of your up account and put it into one of the savers. That's essentially what we call a forward. So it's saying, like, I want to take this $10 that's come in, I just want to shoot that over to a saver. I don't want to do a transfer and have to select $10 or remember what that amount is. I essentially just want to push that transaction across. So that's what we've sort of termed a forward. And so that's the sort of the use case for that is like a friend paying you back that you want to put that money into, your dining out sort of expense fund, or getting a gift from a relative for your birthday that you want to put into a holiday savings account. Yeah. And then the flip side of that, which we call covers, is really that other bucket of balls to continue that metaphor. So I've paid for that that coffee, and I want to actually take that debit, that ball, and I want to actually have that money come from a savings account instead of my transaction account. So it's kind of like we call that a cover, and that's you can use that to, for example, have a $2,000 holiday budget that's actually a savings account, and anytime you spend on that holiday, you just sort of cover that purchase from that savings account. So it's sort of a way of manipulating transactions. It's maybe a technical explanation, but the actual implementation of it in the app is really just kind of long pressing on any transaction. If it's money in, you can sort of send it off to a saver. If it's money going out, you can cover it from a saver.
Got you.
And so that's kind of one of those experiments that we've been running. We launched that a couple months ago in a very manual form, so it's all handled by the customer sort of electing to do that. But the intent for that is that can be something that becomes automated over time. So you can essentially set up rules, and your banking, the card that you use today often determines where that money comes from. I guess in this vision, the card is just kind of a symbolic thing, and where the money comes from is really up to you to determine.
Got you. And that sort of nicely leads on to the next video, this pull to save and forwarding payments. So it's of that similar vein, but what was really interesting here is that you've got this really nice notion of the product doing the work rather than actually having to rely upon these sort of like pre-existing or financial functions that people generally understand. Like here, we're just literally pulling down the app and then putting money into a different part of the product. So again, I would imagine another version of this what you were talking about here, which is sort of like making the product do the work which you would typically do by a sort of very manual process of a transaction or a movement of money like that. Is that how you thought about that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, technically you could send 95 cents from your transactional account into a saver today with any bank just by doing an account transfer, but for most people it's kind of more trouble than it's worth. But the thing is, if you did that every day or every other day, at the end of a year you'd have a pretty good amount of money saved. So and I guess the other thing, especially with moving money between your own accounts, is it's kind of low risk. Like if we sort of make something really like almost addictive, like gamified, and you do it a lot, well, what's the worst that can happen? It's like you save too much and you can always take that money back out if you had too much fun doing it. So we, Pull to Save especially, I think, was kind of the first thing we really did that was like, there's no business case you can really make up for that. It's very hard to kind of like to justify really like at any sort of like economic level, like why we, what's the return on investment of doing this? But it's kind of that intangible thing of like it's a feature people latch onto, and in some ways it's a fantastic, we kind of, in designing it, like this will be a great feature if you're like trying to get your friends to use this app. Yeah. And they're like, why should I do it? It's like you could bore them talking about, like the merchant ID and the timestamps and categorization, or you can just show them like a great demoable feature. Which is our Pull to Save feature. And so we always try and have sort of one of those things on the boil, which is just a bit of a bet, a bit of an intangible feature that maybe will sort of capture people's imagination.
Yeah, really delightful sort of way for the user to actually interact with the product, but in a way which is probably quite low load as well. Like it's just as simple as, like how on Tinder it's a swipe, on this it's a simple swipe, it's as simple as that, isn't it? Cool. So just to wrap up, I wanted to ask you if you had any sort of big plans for the year. Obviously, a lot of things have been derailed over the past few months with what's going on around the world, but any sort of further plans for 2020? And then second of all, you've given us some really nice tips there as to how to build products which actually get shared and that kind of thing. But any kind of thoughts around building products in the age of where we're at now in this day and age?
Yeah, but I think, well, in terms of 2020, we have a stupidly large amount of things planned. Yeah. We actually publish, I guess a few people in our space do this. We're definitely not the first, but I think we have a unique take on it. Whereas we publish our roadmap, and in Up's case, it's kind of this visual roadmap, which we call the tree of Up. Yeah. So we're really just putting it out there. Here's everything we want to do in the next, I'd say it's sort of a year, 18-month type of roadmap. Yeah. So for us, that's kind of, I guess expanding the types of things we offer. So joint accounts is like, sort of a rite of passage for all neos that like people want that, you got to provide it. From our point of view, it's kind of like, we're really excited by our approach because we think it's a little bit different to what's been done before, but certainly one of the most requested features from our customers. So again, we're kind of interpreting all of those different people asking for it and trying to come up with something that's a bit fresh, and we think people will like. The payment space is really interesting in that there's a lot of fintechs that built really compelling, peer-to-peer payments apps for groups of friends to split bills and request money. Banks typically haven't done a great job of that. They've built quite transactional systems. Mm-hmm. So we're really trying to build in some of that stuff into Up and make that a really compelling platform to pay back friends and split bills and things like that. We're hoping to get most of that done this year. TransferWise, probably a well-known brand over there. We announced a partnership with them last year, so that was their sort of our international payments partner. Yeah. So tons of that in that space.
And your roadmap is just amazing as well. Like it's the one thing that I always share whenever people, whenever we're talking about products in any capacity is like, have you seen the way that they present their roadmap? It's not just a Trello board. It's a much more visually stimulating way of presenting it, which is, I think, really, really cool. And everyone who we tend to show it with agrees. So
awesome. Thanks.
That's cool. So that's all the time we've got for today. Thank you so much for joining me, Anson. I could have talked to you for a lot longer than we have done, but I realize it's probably quite late over there. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll speak to you again sometime.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for tuning in. Stop by next week for more insights and journeys. Thanks, of course, to Anson for joining us on the call. A really insightful discussion with him about product and about fintech in Australia. If you want to see a little bit more of 11FS Pulse, head over to pulse.11fs.com where you can request a demo. And if you've got any questions about the product or want to suggest a journey for us to include on the show, then please hit us up at pulse@11fs.com or find us on Twitter @11fspulse. Thanks very much for joining us, and I'll see you next time.